You might be shocked to learn that I am not Mr. Civil Liberties. I was not shocked and appalled when Edward Snowden made public his revelations that all of the major telephone and internet carriers in the United States route all their data through our national security industry so that they can use AI to track any possible terrorism. Because I'm currently reading a book called Dark Sun regarding the making of the hydrogen bomb by Richard Rhodes, and there's just chapter after chapter after chapter about Soviet espionage operations in the United States. So, the United States committed to a vast resupply effort to the Soviet Union starting in 1941, and the Soviets would just take massive advantage. So when the US opened up a fly route from Montana to Alaska to the Soviet Union, on the trip back, the planes would disgorge all these Russians, all these Soviets who, without being checked in by customs, they would get off the plane and then run over the fence of the Montana airfield, hail a taxi cab, disappear into America and commit massive amounts of industrial espionage. And then they would send it back on the Lend-Lease flights, just black suitcase after black suitcase, sealed, just filled with industrial espionage, particularly with regard to America's nuclear program. And so when you read about the massive rape of America's industrial secrets, most valuable industrial secrets by the Soviet Union during World War II, when you learn about the massive rape of American industrial secrets by China, you start to become more sympathetic to something like the massive data endless analysis program unearthed by Edward Snowden. The United States is a relatively open society compared to Russia, Soviet Union, Communist China, and how our rivals just take advantage of our openness to steal our industrial secrets. And you start thinking, bloody hell, maybe we need more government intrusion, maybe we need more government regulation, maybe we need more government scrutiny, Not just an end to illegal immigration, but when you just read and learn about how our rivals and geostrategic enemies take advantage of our open society and steal the most valuable of our industrial secrets, it sickens you, and you think, maybe we need a little bit more of a police state, maybe we need more government surveillance, maybe we need tighter scrutiny. Like, why the hell do we just allow our enemies such easy access to our society? G'day, mates. China just rips us off. All sorts of countries just rip off our proprietary industrial secrets, and we make it way too easy for them. I'm watching on Amazon Prime an Indian TV series called Family Man, about a counterterrorism expert who's also trying to balance a demanding wife and 2 kids. And the TV series portrays the relative ease with which Islamic terrorists from Pakistan infiltrate Indian society and cause massive amounts of havoc. And as a convert to Judaism and a Zionist, I feel awful about what happened in southern Israel on October 7, 2023, and I think it's absolutely necessary that Israel fight back and punish Hamas and wipe out Hamas. But India has absorbed so many Pakistani Islamic attacks and has never responded in kind. India has been attacked again and again by Islamic terror, and it's never mounted any kind of massive response, and compared to Pakistan, India is a relatively open country. So open countries are a lot easier to infiltrate. And so maybe the analysis and surveillance that Edward Snowden unearthed, maybe we need more of that. Like maybe Edward Snowden was a massive traitor. Right? Maybe Tulsi Gabbard deserved to be denied Senate approval for her job as the top dog in American intelligence. Because why should we make it so easy for our enemies to steal our secrets? Right? Why should we make it so easy for Americans to sell out their country? Right? People sell out for money, for sex, for excitement, for ideology. But I didn't know that many innocent Americans have been harmed by the Patriot Act and that kind of government surveillance. What am I missing here, mate? Like, is it really that bloody awful? So there's a time and a place where you want your state to operate as a xenophobic police state, particularly in times of war and danger and emergency. Right? We learned during the influenza pandemic, aka COVID-19, that during a state of emergency, many of your rights can just be taken away to try to preserve the health of the nation state. But when our industrial secrets worth billions of dollars and our military secrets and scientific secrets worth billions of dollars are just stolen so easily by our enemies, right? Maybe the critique that Edward Snowden was some kind of massive traitor, maybe that holds up. Why do we make it so damn easy for our enemies? So, hello world. I'm reflecting on lessons from the book by Richard Rhodes on the making of the hydrogen bomb and how easily the Soviets pierced English and American and Canadian society and recruited spies and stole our industrial military secrets. And there's a tension between maintaining our civil liberties, right, and protecting our nation against rivals, enemies, and terrorists. And I don't know exactly where to draw the line, but as I go through this Richard Rhodes book and learn about the extent of Soviet intrusion into the United States, right, it makes you think, wow, maybe we need to lean more towards increased, heightened government surveillance. That maybe our open society is just way too vulnerable. Maybe we do need these government programs like the Patriot Act. So where George W. Bush got into trouble is that he often didn't ask Congress for approval. So during a state of emergency, Congress almost always gives the president all the power he needs to deal with the emergency. But George W. Bush lost momentum in his second term early on in 2005 for his inept response to Hurricane Katrina. So the American people expect their executive branch, their president, to act forcefully in a state of emergency. And Congress will always give the president all the powers that he needs to act forcefully to respond to an emergency, whether it's a health emergency such as COVID, or hurricane emergency such as Katrina, or national security threat, terrorism. Congress always gives the presidency all the power it needs to deal with an emergency. And Americans naturally look to the president to keep them safe. And George Bush and Donald Trump in his first term erred by not asking Congress for sufficient power to deal with emergencies. And so George W. Bush looked inept in his response to Katrina, and he failed to ask Congress for approval for all sorts of domestic spying programs, and for rendition programs to deal with terrorists abroad. And Donald Trump, if he'd just probably passed an extra COVID relief bill in June of 2020, as Congress wanted to do, right? If he'd responded more forcefully to COVID, if he'd rallied Americans, right, around more restriction, right? Restrictive measures combating COVID were widely popular in advanced societies. So if he'd just been tougher, stronger, more rigorous, more demanding, making more requests on Congress for more power to deal with the COVID emergency, that he likely would have been re-elected. Now, it appears with how effective Trump has been in his second term that it was a good thing that he lost in 2020. It gave him 4 years to reflect and plan and gather with his advisors and come up with a program. He would not have been this energetic if he'd started his second term in January 2021. But the American people in Congress always seems to give the executive branch all the power that it needs to deal with any emergency. The American people look to the executive branch to deal with health emergencies, climate emergencies, military emergencies, criminal emergencies, terror emergencies. And so in times of relative peace, then the news media starts focusing on abuse of government power and government surveillance. But as soon as there's a new emergency, the people overwhelmingly rally behind increased government power and intrusion over their lives to keep them safe. So that's the insight from Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. Luke is still going forward. Was not the popularity of the Iraq War declining by a second term? Yes, Kanye called it. Man, I had life-changing insights and they just slipped between my fingers. Yeah, so in good times, Americans wonder, why are we spending so much on defense? Why do we have so much government intrusion, surveillance, intervention, regulation? Right? They start complaining, but then as soon as there's an emergency, people want more government intervention, regulation, surveillance, interference to keep them safe. So yeah, Hobbes saw this in Leviathan. So Thomas Hobbes and John Locke were two key 17th century political philosophers. And John Locke thought that the state of nature was largely a peaceful place where people could make trades and just willingly form contracts and come together in each other's best interests. While Thomas Hobbes saw the state of nature as creating the conditions where life is nasty, brutish, and short. And so Thomas Hobbes said people primarily want to survive. People primarily want to be safe. And in exchange for their safety, they are willing for the formation of an all-powerful Leviathan, right? A national government who has ultimate power, has ultimate military power and surveillance power and spying power and intrusive and regulatory power. And they'll give up almost everything for the ability to be safe. And every time we have an emergency, real or imagined, right, people naturally tend towards supporting more intrusive, regulating, powerful government. Then, in good times, people get tired of that kind of high levels of taxation, government bureaucracy, intervention, regulation, spying, surveillance, and they demand a peace dividend and a backing off of the powers that previously were keeping them safe. And then we cycle again towards a new emergency, and then we have another threat. And when people are under threat, they are usually willing to give up everything to be safe. G'day, Karachi. John Locke. Have you even read John Locke? So John Locke was probably the most influential philosopher on America's founders. And the European political philosophers, such as Carl Schmitt, right, only become widely known in American political philosophy circles starting in the 1980s. So prior to the 1980s, it was overwhelmingly Anglo-political philosophers who dominated the scene. But in extraordinary times, in states of exception, such as we now might be living in, right? There's supposedly a constitutional crisis, according to the news media, right? The American thinker is Clinton Rossiter, who wrote about constitutional dictatorship in 1948, a classic work. Very dark look, America's political program. And then Carl Schmitt, who wrote a book on the dictator in 1921, Political Theology. And stated that the essence of politics is the friend-enemy distinction. Talk to you blokes later. Bye-bye.